Buenos dias, buenas tardes. I don't know where you guys are at right now. And welcome to second lecture of Spanish here. So last week, as you guys weren't here, it was just a lot of phonetics and some basic words. Just the lecture overview, basically. There's a lot of stuff that we eventually have to go over today. There's not really any way around it. To learn genders, adjectives, adjective-noun agreement, verb conjugation. It's a lot in one presentation, but at some point, you kind of have to just learn this all. It's not as bad as I think once you really get into it. So we have genders and articles. I don't know what your guys' background is, but since you guys understand English, at least you've dealt with, at the very least, articles. In terms of genders, gendered nouns and adjectives, I don't know how many of you guys dealt with that before. Every noun has an arbitrary gender assigned to it, just masculine or feminine, and there are the corresponding articles. So there's definite articles, which would be the English the, and the indefinite article, which is a thing. The refers to a specific thing generally, and a refers to a general thing, a very nebulous thing. For masculine definite articles, you have el y los. These are your singular and plural definite articles. For feminine, la y las. And then your indefinite articles are un y unos, una y unas. We'll see them in sentences. In case you guys are a bit lost on it, it will be cleared up shortly. Now, how do you know if a noun is masculine or feminine? There's a couple ways. Masculine nouns generally end in o. El perro is an example, so the dog, this is masculine. However, there's some masculine nouns end with a, so el papá, el periodista, el idioma. And feminine nouns generally end in a, and in this ending, ion, la mamá, la organización. But of course, there's also exceptions. La radio, la mano, there's a lot of these, and there's endings, of course, that don't fall into either of these categories, but you just kind of have to learn them. Recommendation: learn your new words with the articles. That's really the only way to go about it. Like I said in the first one, these blue slides, we're not really going to go over it. These are just categories of nouns that have a certain gender, cardinal directions, and days of the week, stuff like that. You can look at this on your own time. You'll spend a lot of time talking about people, talking about what you do, what's your career. Sometimes it's not so straightforward for gender by this. To explain, if you want to change from masculine to feminine, talking about certain things like your friend, doctors, relatives, and these kinds of things, sometimes you just change the O to an A, or you just add an A at the end. El amigo, la amiga. So your male friend, female friend. El doctor, la doctora. Male doctor, female doctor. Some don't have an ending change. You would just change the article. So el y la periodista. So the only way you differentiate with gender would be through the change in the article. And some of them just have a different word together. El actor, la actriz, el rey, la reina. As you're making your flashcards, you can note them down, right? I don't think there's a hard or fast rule about these things to say like, oh, this one has an ending change and this one doesn't, unfortunately. And your adjectives. So your adjectives have to match the gender and the plurality of the noun that they're describing. So you have to match singular or plural, and you have to match the gender. And generally, adjective endings are an O or A, and that can be changed, but some of them don't really change for gender. So el carro rojo, las flores rojas. So here we have the color rojo. This is an adjective here, which corresponds to carro, which is one. Las flores rojas. La flor, this is feminine. We have more than one, so therefore we need to change to rojas, because we're indicating we want to match both things. Words such as marrón don't change for gender. You would just say el suelo marrón, say la puerta marrón, so like the brown door. These would not change any ending for it, but you would change for plurality. Los ojos marrones. This, again, will just come with experience, and as you read things and as you come across these things, you'll start noting them in your head. So in general in Spanish, adjectives go after the nouns. There are a couple exceptions. So for example, numerical adjectives, you're saying two of something, half of something, the first thing, the last thing. Some adjectives, bueno, malo, mejor, peor, preciso. So good, bad, better, worse, precise. These generally go in front. There are cases where this rule gets flipped on its head, and it can change the meaning of a sentence. But for now, I would say just stick to the general rule of thumb for most things that they should go after. So like this one, el carro rojo. For now, keep in mind these exceptions of what should go in front, but in general, you should be thinking about putting the adjectives after the nouns. It's a bit confusing, but I feel like I've been saying that a lot in this presentation. But we'll go over examples as we go along. We have some adjectives here that we can work with. So we have the colors here: rojo, naranja, or anaranjado, amarillo, verde, azul, morado, marrón, blanco, negro. They correspond to the colors. And of course here, if you want to describe something: grande, pequeño, raro, interesante, largo, y corto. So we'll use these in the next slides. Yeah, here are a couple more adjectives that we could use to describe people. We won't use all of them today, but just keep them in mind when you look over the presentation later. So let's practice. practice something. So keep in mind the rules that we have. Adjectives match to the gender of the noun, and that they should match in number and plurality. If you guys play Pokemon, I hope you guys play Pokemon, because otherwise this just looks a bit weird, but Cynthia es, you have two options here, bonito y bonita. Cynthia is, which is pretty. Tiene pelo rubio o rubia. She has blonde hair. Los tacones de Cynthia son negros o negras. So we do bonita because Cynthia is the woman, so we would correspond to that. What about her hair? Is it pelo rubia or pelo rubio? It's rubio. So remember, it goes to the gender of the noun, el pelo, not to the gender of the person. Rubio means blonde, so she has blonde hair. Los tacones son negros o negras. Los tacones, masculine noun. So there we go. So that's just kind of the gist of it, right? El profesor Abedul, so this guy, Professor Birch in English, es simpático o simpática. Professor Birch is nice, es simpático o simpática. Su bata, la bata, es blanco o blanca. Su bata, blanca. So here we have a nice picture of a wiener dog, dachshund, whatever you want to call it. Perro salchicha here, wiener dog. We can describe it, right? So I will pull back up the adjective slide. Perro salchicha es. How would we describe this from any of these adjectives? Well, yes, it's short. Pequeño, marrón y largo. Yes. So we're going to learn personal pronouns. Here they are on the side. We will use this as the basis of our conjugation table in the next slide. Yo, tú, él y ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos y ellas. Now, a couple things to discuss. Tú y usted both mean you. Usted is formal, so you would use this with your boss, your in-laws, anybody that's in a position of authority or anything that you want to give like respect to. And then vosotros is, again, a you plural. However, this is informal and it's only used in Spain. Me personally, I can identify it. If you ask me to conjugate it off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to say it with 100% confidence. Whether or not you choose to learn it depends on where you're at, who you're going to be interacting with. And of course, in lieu of vosotros, in Latin America, you would just treat everybody as ustedes. It doesn't always necessarily mean formality. You would just conjugate like that. And of course, in some regions of Latin America, vos is used as the alternative form of tú, but I'm not going over that in this series. This is kind of the ugly part that we're going to spend a lot of time with. These types of conjugation tables is what you would see, at least in textbooks. Spanish has their verbs have three different endings: AR, ER, or IR. And your conjugation tables will look like this. Yo, tú, él, ella, usted will be conjugated in the same way like this. Nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes will also be conjugated in the same way. I would say if you're ever practicing conjugations, draw up your table like this and just get to conjugating with it. And to conjugate, it's fairly easy. So you would take the verb stem, the part before the ending, and then you would tack on the corresponding ending depending on what you're doing. There's a lot of irregular verbs, as always, and some of them are quite important, so you'll just have to learn those by heart. Here we have a couple examples of verbs. This is for conjugation in the present tense, by the way. So what I have here, the underlined part will be your verb stem. So you take your verb stem and you would tack on one of the endings that were just mentioned here. For example, caminar. Yo camino. You would remove this AR, add the O. Tú caminas. Él, ella, usted camina. Nosotros caminamos. Vosotros camináis. Ellos caminan. And that's the paradigm of conjugation. After a lecture, you guys can practice with some of these. You can pull up the conjugation table from one slide, two slides before, and you guys can try it out on your own. I pronounce ellos like ellos. This is also a regional thing we discussed last time with, it's like a Y sound. It's a digraph. The double L is a yo sound. Well, depends where you're at, but for me, it's a yo sound. Now, unfortunately, here you have a lot of irregular verbs, and these are probably some of the more important ones, so we will go over this. So here we have ser y estar. Both of these mean to be. We will go over them at some point because they're not interchangeable. The quick and dirty I will say right now is ser is something more along the lines of permanent characteristics. Estar is more temporary characteristics. Not a perfect explanation, but it's the quick one. It's the bus stop explanation, I would call it. If your bus is pulling up and I have to explain this to you in the 15 seconds the bus is pulling up, I would tell you this. So, tener, to have, hacer, to do, ir, to go somewhere, dormir, to sleep. It's probably what you will be saying most in the server. Yo soy, tú eres, él es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois, ellos son. Estar, yo estoy, tú estás, él está. Keep in mind these accents. You have placed the emphasis on the right place. Nosotros estamos, vosotros estáis, ellos, ellas, ustedes están. Tener, yo tengo, tú tienes, él, ella, usted tiene, nosotros tenemos, vosotros tenéis, ellos tienen. Hacer, to do something, for example, doing homework. Yo hago la tarea, tú haces, él hace, nosotros hacemos, vosotros hacéis, ellos hacen. Ir, to go somewhere. For example, go to the theater, ir al cine, yo voy, tú vas, él va, nosotros vamos, vosotros vais, ellos, ellas, ustedes van, y dormir, to sleep. Yo duermo, tú duermes, él, ella, usted duerme, nosotros dormimos, vosotros dormís, ellos, ellas, ustedes duermen. These are the common ones you'll run into here. And is there a way around learning irregular verbs? Not really. That's why they're irregular. But these are used so often that I would say you will pick them up in no time. We'll move on to question words. Question words have accents on them. And also keep in mind Spanish questions, interrogative sentences and clauses are opened with a question mark. So como is how, cuándo, when, quién, who, dónde, where, cuánto, cuántos, cuántas. This one, make sure it matches with gender and number. So here we have a couple examples. ¿Quién eres? Who are you? ¿Cómo estás? How are you? ¿Cuántos años tienes? We saw this last week. How old are you? ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from? So here we have examples of question words, more question words and question phrases. Here's we have a dialogue. Hola, also with exclamatory statements. We want to open with the upside down exclamation point. ¿Cómo te llamas? Hola, me llamo Juan. ¿Cómo te llamas? Keep in mind, llamo, llamarse. This is a reflexive verb. Again, something we won't cover today. Just llamarse. Keep in mind, AR ending. Keep in mind the conjugations. So me llamo, call myself. It's a very literal translation. Me llamo Diego. Un gusto conocerte. So a pleasure knowing you. Nuevamente, ¿a qué te dedicas, Diego? Literally, what do you dedicate yourself to? In this case, we would really just be using it to say, what do you work in or what do you work as? Soy ingeniero. So here, careers are generally with ser. Soy ingeniero. ¿Y tú, a qué te dedicas? What do you work in? Todavía estoy estudiando para ser maestro de matemáticas. There's a lot of concepts here that I probably did not introduce here. Qué chévere. How cool. ¿Dónde estudias? Where do you study? So again, estudiar, to study. Keep in mind your endings. Estudio en Sevilla. Studying in Sevilla. Very nice city in the south of Spain. También realicé. It says in the past tense. We'll skip over that for now. Mis estudios en Sevilla, pero ahora trabajo en Granada. So here we have the question words and some verb conjugations in action. So in summary, we have our nouns, masculine or feminine. Assignment is arbitrary. Your adjectives, you have to agree with the gender and quantity of a noun. Adjectives will generally go after a noun. We did note some of these exceptions. For example, bueno, malo, things like quantities, dos, medio, these things go before generally, but you should really think adjectives will generally go after the noun. And verbs have three different endings. They're conjugated in a certain way depending on the subject. So the conjugation chart we saw back a couple slides ago. And we also learned some irregular verbs. So ser, estar, tener, ir, dormir, and then also question words. So question words, the most important thing is open your questions with upside down question mark and make sure your question words have accents on them. So because these words also exist independently, they're not just question words, but when you use them as a question, you put the accent on them. Otherwise, they can just go without an accent. So for this week's practice, I would say, so the difference between cuando and cuando. So your second one with the accent, we'd be using that for questions. They both mean when, like if you use them in a sentence. But also alternatively, when you use cuando without the accent in a regular sentence or in a non-interrogative sentence. So they both mean when here. Or when you put in a question, you would put down an accent on it. For homework today, or just your own independent practice, you just practice conjugations if you want to. You can describe something, try and describe parts of somebody's face or a face. Make sure you have your adjective agreement. Talk about anything. Talk about what you did during the day or what you're doing, I guess, because we only learned the present tense. Or you make a fake dialogue like before. And if you look up things like in Word Reference or another online dictionary, very often they'll have conjugation tables. So if you're unsure if a certain word is irregular or if you just need the extra assurance, look it up, try a couple sentences. Like I said, we have verbs here, and then we also have these verbs. Do you have any good recommendations for good online dictionaries? Spanish Dict is a good one. I use Word Reference. For full-out translators, if you really need one, use DeepL. I would say don't use translators if you can avoid it, just because it's better to build your own sentences. But by far, yeah, Spanish Dict I think is a lot better. So, any other questions? I will say, even though all their publications are in Spanish, so you have the RAI, so basically the highest language authority, Academia Española, so the Royal Spanish Academy. If you have any doubts on grammar, you can look these guys up. So they get a lot of questions of, for example, do I use this preposition with this verb, or do I use no preposition, or do I use another preposition? They're the final line. They're the final say on these things. So it's the governing body of Spanish. They will acknowledge things like they will say like this thing is technically not correct but highly used in other regions. But if you have any doubts, later on we'll come up with more doubts as you get more and more advanced into the language and you start interacting with other parts of grammar. But I think my favorite one is actually very relevant to this thing. Actually, all right, here it is. Here, one person, so they also have a Twitter. They respond to these consults. The person here is saying, you can say, una correa es negra, a belt is black, but not that it is marrona. You wouldn't say marrona. You would say, una correa es marrón. It says, are we discriminating against, marronas, right? Against brown, basically. Thank you for your attention. And the Rai says, there are adjectives of two endings like what we learned here, rojo, roja, amarillo, amarilla, listo, lista, smart, and others of only one ending, valid for masculine and feminine, like marrón, azul, or imbécil, or imbecile. I think it's a bit uncalled for on their part, but I think it was quite funny. But they have a lot of these types of consults. So you can say, when you're learning stuff like por y para, they both have very overlapping meanings. You can put down verb por or verb para, and they most likely have some consults on this, and they tell you like what it would be. So this is just something for the future. Gracias por asistir. So thank you for attending. Espero verlos la próxima semana a la misma hora. So I hope to see you guys next week at the same time. Hasta la próxima.